Hey guys, so recently I was able to take my Millennial Money Meetup and do it in a totally new city, my hometown of Vancouver. It was so much fun and honestly kind of a test run to see if I could take my meetup in lots of different cities around Canada, and Vancouver was my first stop, of course. It was so much fun. We had about 40 people who joined us. I wanted to do kind of a different format, a little bit smaller, more community-based, and just, really all about networking, getting to know each other so we can all talk about money and learn from each other. And of course, I was so thankful to be joined by my close friend and someone I kind of fangirl over still, Cait Flanders. So if you don't know, she's a big-time personal finance blogger, podcaster, and she's the author of the upcoming book, The Year of Less, which comes out in January 2018. Of course, we wouldn't have been able to do this event without the support of EQ Bank. They sponsored my first Millennial Money Meetup in Toronto, and of course, they wanted to sponsor my first one in Vancouver. So thank you so much, EQ Bank. Make sure, if you're not aware, go to eqbank.ca because they currently offer the highest interest savings account around in Canada at 2.3%. So make sure to check them out if you're looking for a savings account and want to earn some money on your money. eqbank.ca is where you could do all that. And of course, I was able to record the whole interview I did with Cait Flanders at my event. So if you weren't able to join us live, that's okay. Here's the recording. I hope you enjoy it. So I wanted to have Cait, my pal and one of my favorite bloggers and podcasters, join me for this event because obviously I was a fan of hers before I was friends with her, and I'm super excited to talk to her about kind of the next phase of what she's doing now, which I think is awesome. So if you're not aware of what Cait Flanders has been up to the past several years, like me, who's been following her for all these years. She originally had a blog called Blonde on a Budget, and it was very much about talking about debt and how to get out of debt, and she did it, and we'll get a little bit into that because it's not something that's very easy to do. Now she's out of debt, and now she's trying to kind of plan her life, or she has been planning her life being debt-free, how to maintain that life debt-free. And what's really cool is instead of just all right, I'm done, she's really kind of thinking about money in a very different way, being more mindful with it, which I think is awesome. And she's been on a couple shopping bans, which we'll talk about, which is crazy, but I think it's so neat. And just talking more about how we want to spend our money and being more conscious of that. So, Cait, would you mind just sharing a little bit of your backstory? Let's kind of start about where you started with the debt and how you started blogging and kind of documenting your journey.
Yeah, wow, okay, good question. It's funny because a few people have asked me here tonight how long I've been blogging, and I was like, October 1st, 2010. So I've been blogging for a really long time. I started writing anonymously 7 years ago because at the time I was 25 and I was maxed out with almost $30,000 of debt. And when I say maxed out, I mean it. The banks wouldn't give me anything more. That was it. I had $30,000 or just under, and I had no option sort of then but to start paying it off and to start getting serious about my money. So back then, I took all kinds of measures. In some ways, I would say I probably did a 2-year shopping ban then because I basically didn't spend any money for those 2 years. I put myself on a super tight budget. I just didn't really give myself a lot of disposable income. We can talk about good and bad side of doing that. The good was that in 2 years, I paid off all my debt, which is great because of course, who doesn't want to be debt free? So it was great. However, there were a lot of problems sort of in the way that I paid off my debt, and the biggest one being that I think it was too aggressive. So I didn't give myself, like I said, any disposable income. And so what happened once I was debt-free was that I sort of immediately went back to spending all my money. So I didn't go back into debt, but for reference, when I was paying off my debt, there were months where I was putting up to 55% of my income towards debt repayment every month. Yeah, but it was a lot. So the problem then after was that I sort of had this feeling I'd been depriving myself for a long time. Life hadn't been that enjoyable for those 2 years. I had also been really harsh on myself. I would say a lot of really mean things to myself sort of about how I had gotten into that situation. So all of it led to just a lot of bad feelings. And so once I was debt free, like I said, I went back to spending it all, and I would at the beginning of every month, tell myself, you know what, I'm going to save 20% of my income. It's totally doable. It should have been doable. Like, that should not have been an issue. But I would get to the end of every month, and I used to back then, like, I would publish my budgets every single month on my blog.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh yeah, I remember those.
and I would get to the end of the month, and I would be lucky if I had saved 5 to 10. And instead, my blog posts those months were full of excuses, and I genuinely mean excuses for, like, why I had been only able to save that much. And it was all about, like, oh, well, this other stuff came up, and then this thing happened, and I wanted to go to that event, and I wanted to go on that trip, and whatever. Now, it's not to say that any of those things were bad. Like, you know, having some fun is good, and that's why I think when you're paying off debt, it's extremely important to have some money in your budget to actually enjoy your life. But I think that, like I said, the way I'd done it wasn't good, and it genuinely didn't feel good. So I would publish those posts on my blog and be like, hey guys, woohoo, I saved 6% or something. And I would feel bad about it. I would feel bad writing it. I would feel bad publishing it. I almost felt bad too because the excuses that I was writing and putting out there, so many people were actually commenting, being like, that's okay, Cait. I'm like, come on, guys, push me. I can do better than this. Like, what are we doing? And I didn't feel good though, because I did know that I could do better. So that's the first 3 years of blogging.
Ooh, that's a lot.
And from that is when the shopping ban started.
Okay, so we're going to get to the shopping ban, because like, explain what that is, why you went on it for so long, how did you survive? Because I think I tried to do it for a month, and I was like,
You did try to do it for a month.
I think I did. I don't know if it's on the blog, so it was embarrassing. So I'm like, I'll delete this. This is embarrassing, because I tried doing it for a month. I'm like, how am I gonna do it? I like my things.
Okay, so like I said, I would publish these posts every single month about how little I had saved, and I felt genuinely really bad about it, and bad because I knew I could do better. Also, I had savings goals that I wanted to achieve, and I wasn't. And so I could look back at all my spending for the last year and see how much money I had blown on stuff that, again, like, it wasn't bad per se, but when you're not reaching any of your goals and that feels bad, like, work towards that. Like, what could I start doing so I could actually start achieving some of my financial goals? So the idea for the shopping ban was, it started as, like, I don't even know.
Like, is it shopping bans a thing before you? Because I didn't know. Are they? Did you invent them?
Did I invent shopping?
Because I didn't know they were really a thing before you.
I don't know about that. I think that I hadn't read about it either. I will say that. I remember I didn't even know what the rules were going to be until I started typing them. Like, I'd been kind of stewing on it for a couple of weeks, and then one day I was like, all right, well, maybe I would do this, and I guess I'd be allowed to buy that thing, and I would not be allowed to buy that, and I don't know. It really came from a place, though, of, like, me knowing I had some goals. So a huge one was for me was that I wanted to be saving more for retirement. So I knew I wanted to be putting as much money towards that as I could. I also, it wasn't like intentionally part of the shopping ban at first, but something I'd been wanting to do since I was literally like out of high school was I wanted to travel more, and I never did. Like, my entire 20s, I saw all my friends go on all kinds of cool trips, and I said no to basically everything, literally up until I was like 29.
Wow.
Other than going to a couple of conferences, the only thing I'd done was gone to Vegas. I'd never been anywhere cool. All my friends had been everywhere. And there's two reasons. Like, one, I mean, the story I told myself was like, I didn't have any money. Realistically, that was true. When I got credit cards at 19, I used them like they were free money. So I just used it like it was like a second bank account. So I never had to say no to anything because credit could pay for it. Yay. Like, no. So one of my goals with the shopping ban was that I wanted to be able to travel more as well, because that had just been something I'd been dreaming about for so long, and I was never seeming to make it a reality. So the idea, was like, I came up with 3 lists. So the first one was sort of the essentials, so things obviously you're allowed to buy, or for me, everyone's rules are kind of different on this. So it's like, obviously I'm allowed to buy groceries, I'm allowed to get gas for my car. I say it's basically like anything consumable. So if I used up something, I could replace it. Like, if it was something I genuinely used often, I could replace it if I ran out. And so that was one list. The second list was the non-essentials, things you are not allowed to buy for an entire year. So for me, this included clothes, shoes, accessories, books, electronics, basically anything.
I remember you had a candle addiction. Sorry to bring that up, but
Just
you did.
said, I remember you have a candle addiction.
I'm like, who buys candles? I always wonder when I go to the shops, I'm like, who the hell's buying this $10 candle?
Everyone.
It's just not
Just
me.
not you. No, but it was one of the things on the list. I wasn't allowed to buy candles. And literally, it's funny. I do like candles, but you literally like lighting your money on fire. Let's be realistic. So the candles were on the list. I could not buy candles. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, basically anything that I didn't need. So if I actually needed something, I could buy it. So there were a couple of things throughout the year. My plan was to do this for a year. There were a couple of things that did come up that you actually need to buy. So for the ladies, you'll probably understand this. You totally know what I'm going to say.
Yeah, I do.
So women, it's a very common issue that the jeans will rip in your inner thigh. Yes, thank you.
Right.
So, it is so annoying, and you think you can fix it. Like, one of the things that I did that year was I learned how to sew, and so I'd asked my mom and my aunt if they could teach me how to sew. So I did learn how to patch it. That patch lasts about 6 days, like, if you're lucky, especially denim that stretches, and it has to just stretch being over you anyways. So that doesn't work. So eventually I had to go buy jeans because I only owned one pair. So I'm allowed to buy a pair of
It
jeans
sounds like my
to
husband
replace
who
that.
has one pair of jeans. And
Yes.
he's adamant that that's all he needs.
Yes. No, it is. So I still only own one pair of jeans.
Good for you.
Yeah, bro. It's not hard. So, what else happened that year? Oh, actually, my cell phone. Good old electronics. They build them not to last. So my cell phone did this thing for months and months and months where it would shut itself off. Super annoying. And eventually one day it just turned off and it never turned on again. So I bought a cell phone. But I also, in making that decision, I learned new things that I wouldn't have done before. Like, I didn't buy the newest model. I bought the second to last model, right? Like, it's like, do I actually need that? Do I want that much money to be going towards this thing that is only going to last me a couple of years? Probably not. So I could, the second list was, like all these things I wasn't allowed to buy, but I was allowed to buy something if I absolutely had to replace it. And the third list was something I had called an approved shopping list, but that was sort of, like, to describe the items. It's first, like, one was a dream. My bed was 13 years old. I really wanted to replace it. This is not some, like, I want something fancy. Like, I'm like, I need a bed. My back hurts. Like, I'm old now. My back hurts. I want a new bed. So a goal was to get a dream. Guess what? Shopping ban, 3 months in, I finally was able to afford a bed. Wow, it's weird how that happens. So a bed, there were just some things. I didn't even own, like, winter boots, anything that could work for winter. So I added that to the list. I bought one pair of boots. They've lasted me many years.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 3 lists. That was the ban. I set out to do it for a year. My goal was 2 things. One was to see if I could live on less. But I also really wanted to start saving towards these goals.
Which I think this will be a good transition to your book. She has a book coming out in January. Woo, called The Year of Less. So, lots of good stuff. I'm so excited to read it. But what I guess, what I would love to know, so you experienced it. What were some of the key things that you got out of it? What did you learn? What did you expect? What were things that surprised you from the shopping ban?
It's funny because, like, my first answer, because we're talking about money, would sort of be like, I could tell you the numbers. So the numbers were, like I said, when I started the shopping ban, I was going through this period of only saving 5 to 10% of my income. By the end of it, my income every single month was, I think it was 51% on average that I'd lived off of.
Wow.
So my expenses throughout the month, it was 51. And then I spent 18% on travel.
Wow.
And so I saved 31% of my income for retirement that year.
Mm-hmm.
So financially, there were obviously successes in that I was able to achieve a lot of goals. I went on a ton of trips that year. It was so much fun. I got to see so many friends, see a bunch of new places I'd never been to before. Actually, we hung out in Charlotte at a conference.
Why is that
I think
in
it was.
Charlotte?
Oh, it was New Orleans that year.
Yeah.
Okay, it was New Orleans. Oh my God, that was in the book. I should know that.
Oh my God.
I've just been like 6 years. Like, I forget what city it's been in. So like, financially it was great. I think that what was more interesting, and is something I talk a lot more now on the blog, was that some of the bigger things I learned were more about all the habits I had around why I was spending for so many years and changing those habits. And there were two things. Like one of the things, I totally forgot to mention this, but it's an easy one to talk about. One of the things I told myself I wasn't allowed to buy for the year was takeout coffee. And that was not because like takeout coffee's bad. I don't believe in the whole like all those rules, like the latte factory, and you're not allowed coffees if you want to like save. Like, I don't believe in any of that. Like, you can buy whatever adds value to your life, spend money on it, that's fine. For me, I just wasn't comfortable with how much I was spending on takeout coffee anymore. Like, I couldn't justify, I worked from home. I couldn't justify that I was, for whatever reason, spending like $100 a month on takeout coffee. I mean, you've been to the building I was living in.
Yeah.
It was on the bottom floor.
Yeah,
Like, it was very easy, but I wasn't comfortable with it. So I was like, changing that habit though. Like, I didn't realize until I couldn't get takeout coffee how many habits I had around it. So like, even as something as simple as like the mornings I would wake up where I was so tired that you feel like you can't pick your arms up, like you just get out of bed and you're like, oh, do I have to do anything today? For whatever reason, back then, like, this was a habit. It seemed easier to me to get dressed and go downstairs than to just make it at home.
To like, have a French press.
Yeah, like, yeah. I don't know. So anyways, it's like breaking little habits. I also had a huge, really bad habit for me, again, because I don't need this stuff, is that pretty much any time I would think of a book I wanted to read, I would just buy it. Like, I would immediately go on Amazon or Chapters, whichever had it cheaper. Back then was the like $25 free shipping. I would add a second book just to get the free shipping. All of a sudden I had 2 books showing up, right? Like, this happened all the time. And I ended up having like 50 books I hadn't even read. I've probably had more in my life too that I've just given away at other points, right? So I've probably given away 100 books or more that I've just never read, but I had bought, I don't know, on a whim because it seemed like something I would want to read. So there was a lot of that. It was a lot of habit stuff. Not to get like emotional, but the bigger part of it was that I realized that year I went through a bunch of different things. So one being a breakup, one being my parents ended up getting divorced. Things that I had not expected to happen, and I learned a lot about my tendencies to overconsume when something like that is happening, like when something really crappy is happening, to be honest, right? Like, it went way beyond just like a bad day at work, way beyond that. Like, you just realize, like, when you're feeling so down, and it's so interesting because I've never identified as a shopaholic, so that's where it's like, it's sort of another thing, like, I've never identified as that, but it doesn't mean you don't have tendencies to overconsume. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you've never used retail therapy. There is like psychology around actual spending, and that it does things to your brain and it makes you feel better temporarily. So I learned just a lot about my personal tendencies to overconsume when things like that happen. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's so much more I could say. I'm like...
Well, you wrote a book on it, so...
You wrote a whole book. I'm sure the rest is in the book. Yeah, no, and that's, I think, why I think your kind of personal finance journey is so interesting to me right now, because it really does focus on the spending. And all of us, like, I know I saw a lot of people nodding their heads, and me included, when you were talking about emotional spending. Oh my gosh, definitely. I definitely experienced that a ton a good year ago before I left my job. I was spending a lot of money, and I didn't really realize it was a problem until I started looking at it. I'm like, well, what am I even buying? And why am I buying? Oh, it's to make myself feel better. And then it just kind of goes from there. Yeah, yep. I totally get that.
Well, and I can also add that one of the... Is this on?
I don't know.
Did you just turn it off?
No. Josh?
Can you hear me?
Oh, hello.
I would also add that I talk about it a lot more in the book, but one of the other things that made me realize was my tendencies in past, like, lives of mine, is like that I used to also binge or overconsume on food or alcohol in those same instances. So there's just a lot of crossing of that in the book, and it just in life. Like, you have a bad day, oh, well, you reach for a glass of wine, or just you spend. Like, everyone's habits are different. And so the biggest thing that I took away from that, or from the whole year, just spending wise, was like, nothing I spend money on is going to help. That's not what's going to help this. Like, what really needs to happen is I need to strip things back and figure out what's going on and fix that stuff instead. I guess the other part of it, and it's not about money, but I also got rid of 70% of my belongings that year. which at the same time that you decide to not shop for a year, it feels very like counterintuitive to also decide to get rid of all of your stuff. And so like the argument, I don't have one. I will never go around and tell everyone that they need to do that. You don't need to do that. What it did teach me, again, going back to the spending though, and the habits, was that there were so many things I had in my home, not only that I had kind of wasted money on, which then it's like, you know, what other dreams and opportunities had I missed in life because I hadn't been allocating money to what I actually wanted, but for whatever reason was acquiring stuff instead. The other thing that happened with getting rid of stuff was I was able to see how many things I used to buy for the ideal version of myself. So that being like, when you go shopping, like, not always, but there are oftentimes we'll go shopping, we'll see something, whether it's a book or a piece of clothing or an electronic, like anything, and you immediately put yourself into this like headspace of like, if I have that, I'll be more this, that, or the other. Like, I'll be smarter, I'll look more professional, this book will help me become a better person, like all kinds of stuff. And so I was putting all these expectations on these objects that number one, I never got because I didn't use or wear any of it. So like, I didn't get better or smarter or more creative or more professional. I didn't do those things. But yeah, it really just showed me like, if I buy stuff in the future, I want it to be because it actually aligns with like who I am. I will actually use it. Because at the end of the day, like, one of the biggest things I want to say is like, spending money is not bad. It is not bad to spend money. You are not a bad person because you buy anything. But it feels so much better when you're actually spending money on stuff that you use, like stuff that doesn't collect dust, stuff that actually adds value to your life every single day. Then it feels great. Like, then there's no shame, there's no bad stories you can tell yourself in your head about like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Like, if you're actually using it, great. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can buy whatever you want as long as you use it. So that's sort of what I've gone through ever since. So I ended up doing it for a second year. Like, I finished the first year and I decided to do it for a second year because it was sort of intuitive to me now. Like, it was just common sense, like it was just sort of a way of life. The one reason I decided to continue was because the one thing I had regretted not doing was I wished I had kept track of how many things I actually did buy and use. And now this sounds like extremely boring. Like, I wanted to keep track of things like how many sticks of deodorant I used.
Oh, that's a good, oh my gosh, that's so specific.
Well, I mean, in general, like literally all toiletries, I think that I wasn't someone who did this a lot, but you see it, like people stockpile, you see a sale price on something, and so you buy like 4 of them because you're like, you'll never see that sale price again. Insider tip is like, sales are cyclical, and you'll usually see it that price within 45 days. So like, it will come again. But I did do that sometimes, like I'd buy 2 or whatever, and then you just have them building up for a long time. Like, fun fact, I think I used 5 sticks of deodorant in a year. Like, it's not that much. And like, I think I used 4 tubes of toothpaste, or like it's super weird, but it was more to show me that like, we buy so much stuff that we don't actually need.
Yep.
Right? So it's just a way of like, actually having some data of like, what a maybe average female consumer would need.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it was super dorky. It was totally for like data points. I was very curious, but it's helped me. It's helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I have no idea how much deodorant I use, but now I'm kind of curious.
Next time you start one, write the date that you like opened it.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's so dorky, but it's kind of fun.
No, I like that, and I think I relate to that a lot, just because when me and my husband moved out of our tiny 1-bedroom apartment, bought a 2-bedroom townhouse, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, we don't have that much stuff, so it's gonna be easy to move, and it's true. And we've been there for a year. I'm like, we don't have enough space. How did that happen? It's like, it's not that we, it didn't feel like we really accumulated that much, but somehow we did, and somehow we don't have space. And I think that's probably, it's a space issue, Vancouver. It's like, you can't find a very big space in Vancouver. But it's also about, I really like that, really just taking that extra time, maybe doing something crazy like a shopping ban, or like tracking exactly to the, deodorant stick what you're spending, to really see what where are your dollars going. And I think honestly, it's only the past couple of years that I started to look more at my spending and see if it was associated to the life I wanted, the person I wanted to be, the values that I thought I stood for. And it was, it's sort of hard to look at those numbers and realize they're not reflective of all of those things. It's a blow to your ego, and you kind of freak out and you don't know what to do. But I think it's really important for us to do, especially, millennials, I like to say this a lot, we've kind of, not had the easiest time. A lot of us have, graduated during the recession. A lot of us aren't making as much as, to keep up the cost of living in these expensive cities. So it's even more critical now to really pay attention to how we're spending our money because, it's hard out here.
It's expensive.
It's expensive. It's expensive. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I know I'm super pumped to learn more in your book, but what else would you like to kind of let people know?
I don't know, it's a good question. I think that it's funny because any podcast interview I've done, whatever, people are usually like, is there anything we missed? Or if you could give one piece of financial advice, what would it be? And normally people are like, save more or spend less. And I'm like,
Those are, no, yeah, I'm like, those are good.
It's fine. It's fine. I think, there we go. I think that, I think one of the biggest things I've learned over the past few years, and I can say this from looking back at how I used to use credit cards and to how I spend today, I think that it's more interesting in the short term, rather than trying to become a financial expert and get all your shit together, rather than trying to do that, I would say pay attention to how it feels every time you spend money. I think that it's so interesting to pay attention to spending money on something, and if it makes you feel bad, stopping and asking yourself why. Is it because you don't have the money? Is it because you're buying it for the wrong reason? Is it because, you're about to go into debt for it? Just figuring out if it doesn't feel good, why are you doing it? Why are you putting your money towards that stuff if it doesn't feel good? So again, I'm not trying to be in an emotional way. That's where I just sort of bring it back to the mindfulness stuff of paying attention, get into your body in a little bit. We do so many things, we're reactionary. Everything is always fast, done for convenience. And I think if we just stop and pay attention to how we're feeling, it also then feels good when you spend money on stuff it never feels good to spend money, no. It also then feels good to spend money on stuff that you get a lot of joy from, right? I feel good when I'm on a trip and I've saved the money I wanted for that trip, because then I can enjoy the exact trip that I want. If I want to do something, I can afford it because I've taken the time to save for it and I enjoy the trip and that thing so much more. And so it just feels good to be on that side, that side of things where it can actually feel good to spend money and not always shame yourself or just be this is wrong for some reason, or it's just not getting me what I want. So that's my advice.
That's good advice, girl.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that recording. If you want to attend one of my next Millennial Money Meetups, all you have to do is go to millennialmoneymeetup.com and you can pre-register for a future event. If you want me to come to one of your cities, hey, also pre-register or shoot me an email and maybe you can help me organize one in your city. That would be super awesome. Just email me at jessica@jessicamoorhouse.com. Easy peasy. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and hope to see you at one of my future events.